Now, like you rightly put it, the issues about what is seeming to be double standards when it comes to dealing with the refugee issues is possibly one of the main reasons why, Kenya is stamping its foot on this and saying, hey, how comes the world is very quick to respond to an emerging humanitarian crisis in Europe because of the migration crisis emanating from the conflicts in the Middle East. But when it comes to Kenya, how comes that amount of attention and resources are not channeled to this part of the world?
We saw the attention given to refugees from Syria into Europe. We saw in Southeast Asia boats going with refugees and migrants across the seas, also world attention. And when the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and I saw that, we wanted very much to send a message that this is a global issue. It's an issue of global solidarity. And that's why we called in a huge international conference, summit meeting in New York on the 19th of September, on the day before the general debate. We count on more than 100 heads of state and government coming in and discussing migration and refugees from a global perspective. And you're absolutely right. When it comes to refugees, you have most of the refugees in countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. When it comes to migration, it's also a global phenomenon. So I think we need to avoid double standards and look at this from the point of view of shared responsibilities.
Talking about shared responsibility, I know it is the primary mandate of the United Nations. Global peace and security is actually at the core of the mandate of the United Nations. Just recently, we have seen a situation where the European Union has been the major funder of AMISOM, cutting down quite a significant amount of funding to AMISOM and its operations. How then does the United Nations cushion these countries that are troop contributing to AMISOM?
Before I go into Somalia, I just want to underline the formula that I think we should all remember if we are to achieve lasting peace. And that is, there is no peace without development. But there is no development without peace. And there is none of the above without respect for human rights, the rule of law, and well-functioning institutions. These are three factors that are needed, definitely, in Somalia, both peace, development, and human rights. We will have to work on all three at the same time. When it comes to Somalia, you are right. This is a hugely difficult area and issue to deal with. I was there in 1992, 93, during the worst part of the civil war with the highest degrees of casualties and an absolutely enormous suffering. We've been struggling, and the Somali people have been struggling with coming to terms with that period and finally getting on their feet. I would say that the signs are positive. You have, of course, the horrible threat of Al-Shabaab, which, of course, the country and the people of Kenya has paid a very high price for. And that is, of course, a very important factor of insecurity. But when it comes to the discussions about the federal structure, the election process, and different programs of health and education and so forth, we are on the right track. We have unfortunately needed a huge number of peacekeepers. I feel it's a sad state of affairs that we need over 20,000 troops there. I would have wished that we would have rather put capacity into helping the Somalis develop their own security structures so they are not dependent on such a large force. But that's the way it is. As far as the European Union is concerned, I know as a former foreign minister of Sweden that the European Union paid a lot of money to the operations in Somalia, and we are grateful to the European Union for having done so. Now, the problem is more basic, namely that very often now we have African soldiers doing peacekeeping financed by voluntary contributions. And there is now a very serious discussion going on in the United Nations whether these operations should not be financed on the regular budget, on the peacekeeping budget. We have only started that discussion, but we, the Secretary and I, have passed on that message to the membership that we have to take this seriously, not to be dependent on one category of countries giving their donations. So their reduction of 20% of the costs is taken from the perspective that they would want to see, I think, a changed model of financing. I hope we can achieve that in the end. But I would definitely hope, more than ever, that we will see more of a Somali capacity and less of a foreign troops presence needed.
Already, as you speak about looking at possibilities and ways of seeking global financing for the Somalia peace operations, already countries like Kenya and of course Uganda have already indicated that they are threatening to pull out their troops out of that country. Of course, what implications would that have to the stabilization of that country, bearing in mind that Somalia is actually supposed to possibly hold its first democratic elections in just in August this year?
Well, I can't hide from you that it would be of grave concern if we would see a drastic reduction of the presence of African peacekeepers in Somalia, particularly at this crucial time with the elections coming up and the insecurity of the situation. And we must not do anything to leave room for Al-Shabaab to expand their influence. And that's why, again, we have to deal with the refugee issue in such a way that we don't leave room for extremist groups to use this period to promote their positions. But I would very much hope that we would come to an agreement on the presence in Somalia, and that we also would at least see indications where the member states are going on the financing responsibilities.
Still talking about the issues of peace and security, for us as a region, security is really one of the major concerns for this region. Burundi, for instance, there are fears, even within the United Nations, that Burundi could very easily slide into a genocide. And yet we have seen a situation where President Nkurunziza seems to be having the upper hand here. Even the ongoing peace talks that are being mediated by the EAC, the East African Community, doesn't seem to be heading anywhere, apart from what we've seen, a blanket condemnation by the UN Security Council. Is there a lot more that the UN can do to be able to restore some sense of order in that part of the world?
We work very much with this issue, both diplomatically and in very close contact with the Security Council. The Security Council visited Burundi recently and met with the leadership. The Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, came there a couple of weeks later. We will very much work in close cooperation with the EAC, the East European Community and President Mkapa. We have our own special envoy, Mr. Benomar, who is in very close contact with him. We're also very close contact with the African Union. And we will try to encourage the dialogue between the different political parties in Burundi. It's very important that such a dialogue gets started, because there is a risk, as you indicate yourself, that this could turn into an ethnic issue. And if it turns into an ethnic issue, we can get close to some of the horrible memories that we have of the past. Then this must never happen. So we will very strongly encourage the political dialogue together with our African friends, and then be in contact with the Security Council. There is a discussion going on about a possible police presence in Burundi, and there are different views about the size of such a presence. This is one of the stabilizing factors that could be possibly utilized, but the most important thing is that there is a realization on all sides that one has to sit down and talk, have a political dialogue.
I will go to the issue of sustainable development goals. Basic commodities like food, water and shelter is still a big problem for a majority of our populations. We are yet to even absorb, or rather even actualize, the Millennium Development Goals. 1.5 years almost into the launch of the Sustainable Development Goals. Can the United Nations sit pretty and say, we can simply just move on and say we are now at the point where the issues of development, Millennium Development targets that were set, can be washed away and we move into the issue of sustaining development agenda?
No, we cannot rest on any laurels. We made some progress in some goals, particularly on education. Finally, we have primary education all over the world. So the education goal was almost achieved in the MDGs, but I'm the first one to tell you that we have an unfinished agenda. And the SDGs certainly take over the challenge of still fighting poverty. We have, as a leading theme, leave no one behind. We have to look particularly at those furthest behind. I worked for a prime minister once who told me the best quality of a society is to look at how you treat those most vulnerable, the poorest. That's where we have the quality control of societies. And I'm a student of the UN Charter, and the first 3 words of this charter is "we the peoples." We are here, both as international organization, UN, and member states, here to serve our people. We are accountable to the people when it comes to peace, development and human rights. So we take that over, but what is new with the new goals, that is that we connect them much more dynamically to other sectors. We have to accept now universality. Every country are bound by these goals, rich as poor. Sustainability must be our theme. The world that we hand over to the next generation is not a pretty world. And we have to now really mobilize across the board the peace and security work, development work, and human rights and institution building. We have to mobilize the private sector, the civil society, the academic and scientific world, if we are to achieve these goals. So I would say, yes, we have an agenda still there, but we also need to take it more seriously, more deeper and more broader. We have to work much more horizontally and much less in silos vertically. The most important word in the world today, in my book, is the word together. Together is what we have to do practically everything. And the good international solution, think migration, refugees, think climate change. The good international solution in today's world is in the national interest. We have to do this, and that's why Kenya should be so proud of having here in the heart of Africa, the headquarters in Africa of the UN, now dealing with these issues of survival, the existential issue of fighting climate change and improving our environment, which creates the living conditions for all of us. That's the basic issue we need to solve now, which are related both to poverty and everything else we want to improve the life of the people of the world.
Granted, of course, Kenya being maybe one privileged, one of the only 4 countries in the world that is hosting the United Nations headquarters, and also a signatory to the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. But as a country, do you think we are making significant progress enough to be able to say that we are winning the war against climate change? And especially just having been part of the launch of looking at those images of the melting ice on top of Mount Kenya.
No one can say that we are winning the battle. We just are forming our forces now. We have to mobilize all good forces. We have to accept responsibility for our children and grandchildren and really start a new way of thinking and acting, making sure that we have sustainable production, sustainable consumption, that we save water, that we preserve the power of science in dealing with the challenges of sustainability. I would say now is the time for us to mobilize, and I think Kenya, being now the host nation of these efforts, will be in the center of these efforts. And the fact that this assembly that I was part of today had over 130 ministers of environment who now have a growing importance inside their government, is a good sign of what can come out of international cooperation. But I would say our declarations, our agreements in New York or Paris will mean nothing unless they are translated into reality among the nations. That these goals, the sustainable goals and the Paris goals on climate, are turned into national action and even local action.
And unless the developed world, especially the major polluters like the US and China, are forced to significantly reduce their emissions.
Exactly. But there is a realization among those nations that you mentioned, not least China and the US, that they have to go in a different direction, and they are the biggest polluters, and those who contribute most to CO2 emissions. So we have a global responsibility. You know, today's world, whatever your neighbor does affects us, and vice versa. Everything we do affects our neighborhood. That should be the best force of peace in the world. And we need this in today's world where there are so many forces, extremist forces. They want to scare us and divide us and polarize us. And they use this fear factor to cause this view of the outside world as a problem, when in fact we are dependent on each other. So as a representative of UN, I think now is a historic time whether we will go the road of working together or looking inward and looking at the outside world as a problem, or even as an enemy. So we must not be provoked. We must not be scared. We must believe in working together, and that's what this is all about, whether it is UN or Kenya.
And finally, maybe Deputy Secretary General, I really want to get your views on this as the head of the United Nations. There's been a lot of violence on Kenyan streets over the past few weeks due to elections and disputes over, the management of our electoral system. Does that concern the United Nations in any way?
Well, we are involved in helping these elections to be fair and conducted well, and we are very proud to be asked to play that role, and we hope very much that there will be developments in this country so that these elections can take place in such a way that you will have the outcome of a democratic vote, and that the political parties will move in such a direction that that will be possible. Of course, we as the United Nations always react when you see violence around whatever it is, wherever around the world. It's a sad moment when you see those headlines, but we hope very much that the Kenyan leadership and the Kenyan people in their wisdom will choose the road of peace and cooperation and dialogue.
Thank you so much, Secretary General.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for speaking to KTN News.
Thank you.